This is Noah from Climate Action Campaign, and today I'm going to be speaking about bikes and stopping the climate crisis. If you could jump to the next slide. Awesome. So I'll start by saying that the most up-to-date climate science tells us that we must reach carbon neutrality by mid-century and negative emissions thereafter to stave off the most devastating impacts of climate change. And with 42% of greenhouse gas emissions in the San Diego region coming from transportation, largely from cars, we have to prioritize getting people into better options, more sustainable modes of travel, so we can seriously reduce emissions from the transportation sector. And for us, that means getting people onto bikes. Next slide. So California has many state climate goals and climate laws, and I wanted to start our group's presentation tonight by highlighting a few examples, key examples related to cycling. So our regional planning agency, which is called SANDAG, is run by elected officials from every jurisdiction throughout the region, and they're responsible for all major transportation planning. So SB 375 on the top right there, that law requires SANDAG to outline our region's plans to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 19% by 2035. And this is particularly important because such a huge chunk of our emissions are coming from transportation, and transportation is what SANDAG oversees. Second, I'll make note of Executive Order B5518, which is a state goal set by Governor Brown to achieve carbon neutrality by 2045. And that's in line with the most up-to-date climate science I mentioned earlier. And while this is an executive order, not a state law, it shows that California is headed in the direction of zero carbon, further demonstrating our need to get people onto sustainable modes like bikes. And finally, at the local level, we have what are called climate action plans. I'm sure many of you are familiar, also called CAPs. CAPs are a tool used by many local jurisdictions to identify greenhouse gas emissions reduction strategies, and they're often legally binding. And many of these CAPs have what are called mode share targets. So these are goals set for the percentage of commuters using certain types of sustainable modes other than sustainable modes other than cars, such as biking, walking, and transit. And for example, the city of San Diego has this ambitious mode share target for cycling of 6% traveling to work by bike within what are called transit priority areas by 2020, and 18% commuting by bike by 2035. Next slide. So as you can see here in these pictures, thanks to Katie for these photos, biking is not good for every trip. You might need another mode if you're moving your mattress, but we do know that 40% of trips in the US are less than 2 miles, certainly a bikeable distance. So there's definitely room to shift our behavior for those trips where it makes sense. Next slide. So this is the bottom line on climate and bikes for us. Bike infrastructure can be implemented quickly, and this is important because the climate crisis is hitting now. We don't need any more reminders of that with the devastating wildfires and the heat of the past month. And so we have no time to waste. And to name a few examples of quick action, Paris recently committed to completing a network of 650 kilometers of cycleways in the face of the coronavirus crisis, so people can have socially distanced ways of commuting to work. And Seattle is implementing 20 miles of permanent stay healthy streets to encourage more sustainable modes like bikes. And these examples show us that cities can act quickly to reallocate street space to make cyclists feel safer, therefore inducing biking and reducing car trips. We only have a few years to stave off the worst impacts of climate change and to ensure a livable future, and this means we urgently have to transition people away from fossil fuel dependent travel. Next slide. So bigger transportation investments like rail infrastructure and bus infrastructure, for example, can take a long time to implement. And while a lot of us are certainly very supportive of those strategies, cycling is a key shorter term strategy. And so we want to be urging our local cities to repurpose the existing right-of-way to redesign streets using non-construction solutions like flex posts, like paint, and like semi-permanent barriers. These are really relatively quick and cost-effective tools to create safe biking facilities while we also work towards the longer-term sustainable modes of transportation. Next slide. So both quick and long-term implementation of all climate investments, including biking facilities and other sustainable transportation infrastructure, it requires centering equity, and more than anything, that includes meaningful outreach and dialogue that is led by the community members as projects are developed. Due in large part to a history of redlining and racial covenants, the climate crisis and environmental injustices, such as dangerous air pollution from cars and trucks, have and will impact low-income communities of color first and worst. And because of that history of racist policymaking, communities of color have gone decades without the necessary infrastructure investment. And these are the neighborhoods that absolutely must be prioritized for all sustainable transportation infrastructure first, to ensure cleaner air and cleaner water and safer streets and more connected and sustainable mobility options. So that's it for me. I want to thank you all again for joining us, and I'll pass it on to Katie, who will talk a little bit about biking as it relates to health.
Thank you, Noah. My name is Katie Christ, and hi to everyone. I'm on the board of the San Diego County Bike Coalition, and I'm also a public health researcher at UC San Diego. So climate change isn't the only crisis that we're facing. Many of you may be aware that the US is the only wealthy country that's seen its average life expectancy decline in recent years from 2015 to 2017. And this is in large part due to physical inactivity, which is a leading risk factor for mortality and unfortunately is now responsible for roughly 6% of deaths worldwide and 8% of deaths in the US. And why is that the case? Because being inactive is related to most of the leading causes of death, including heart disease, diabetes, certain types of cancers. And so the impact isn't just on our health. Not getting enough activity has a huge economic cost, with a price tag of about $117 billion per year, much of which is borne by the public sector. So if we think about how much money we could be investing in other areas if we were a more active nation, it's pretty staggering. So that's kind of all the bad news. But the good news is that being sufficiently physically active is linked to reductions in pretty much every health condition that you can think of, from heart disease, stroke, cancers, metabolic syndrome, you know, the list goes on. And there's really been a shift in how we think about physical activity over the years. So we used to think that we needed 30 minutes per day of kind of high intensity exercise. But now we know that even shorter bouts at more moderate intensities, so something like biking down the street to visit a friend or to go to the store, like someone mentioned at the beginning of this call, that still confers substantial health benefits. And so biking specifically, which is part of what we call active transportation, or just walking or biking in order to get yourself around, has been associated not only with more physical activity and a higher likelihood of meeting the recommended levels of activity, but also with these same improved health outcomes that we're just discussing, including, you know, reduced risk of all-cause mortality, diabetes, hypertension, things along those lines. In studies across time, cycling's been shown to result in lower BMIs. And it's also just generally easier on your body and joints than some other forms of exercise like running. especially as we age. And so incidentally, these benefits are also true for e-bike users, which is good news. Even though riding an e-bike may have a slightly lower intensity of activity, e-bikers tend to report longer daily trips. So across an entire week, they actually have very similar levels of physical activity compared to a more traditional cyclist. But the real improvement can be seen in people who switch from a car to an e-bike for transportation activities, and they experience huge gains in their activity minutes per week. So in addition to these physical benefits, cycling's also been linked to numerous mental health and cognitive improvements. So increases in cortisol that result from just short bouts of cycling have been shown to relieve stress, reduce anxiety, reduce depressive symptoms, and improve overall mood. And these effects appear to be amplified by exercising outdoors. So there was a study that was done that compared people cycling just on a machine versus cycling while viewing a green environment. And it showed that those who were, when they were viewing nature, not only reported an improved mood, but they also reported doing less work, even though their heart rate and their breathing rates were the same across both conditions. Short bouts of cycling have also been associated with improvements in cognitive tests of memory and reasoning and planning, and also associated with an increase in brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, which is associated with a reduced risk of diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. And then lastly, I think we can't help but think about the current coronavirus pandemic that we're experiencing, which has really highlighted how health is so closely tied to the environments that we live in. And air pollution, much of which comes from our transportation systems, as Noah was just talking about, also causes lung and respiratory disease, along with the chronic conditions that increase someone's chance of severe complications from the coronavirus. And the data has kind of borne this out, that we see deaths from COVID-19 are highest in places with poor air quality. But also, being sufficiently physically active is a really powerful tool for us to fight against COVID, because physical activity improves immune functioning. It also reduces inflammation, so that in turn could reduce the severity of infections. It's a very powerful intervention for many of the pre-existing chronic conditions that we know now increase the risk of severe COVID infections, like obesity and high blood pressure, diabetes. It's also effective, as I was just saying, in reducing anxiety and depression, which could have important benefits during this time. And physical activity also has been shown to enhance the efficacy of vaccines. So really, it's an important thing that can get us kind of through all phases of this crisis. So that's it from me. Next, I'm going to hand it over to Stephen.
Thank you, Katie. I'm Steve Gelb with the San Diego 350 Transportation Committee. The pandemic has actually induced some bike sales and bike ridership, and it's kind of given us a head start. At the same time, we're experiencing an e-bike revolution. E-bikes' vast potential for reducing congestion, carbon pollution, and improving riders' health make them an essential remedy for the climate crisis, and their rapid adoption has really come at a perfect time for us. So, how did the Netherlands become the mecca for bike riding? In the Netherlands today, 27% of trips are on bicycles. In cities, the percentages are even much higher. And one study found that 6,500 deaths a year are prevented in the Netherlands because of people riding bikes, and life expectancy is lengthened. But it was not always this way. The tipping point for the Dutch came in the early 70s in response to a campaign against children's deaths due to cars, as well as the oil embargo, which made gasoline very scarce. At this moment, we can make this moment San Diego's tipping point. E-bikes eliminate the main obstacles to bike commuting. A study found that people are most concerned about hills, distances, and arriving sweaty. But e-bikes eliminate these problems. They allow people of all ages and levels of fitness to get from one place to another. Pedal assist lets them climb hills and go further with less effort than on a conventional bike. And unlike drivers, e-bike riders enjoy the outdoors and arrive in good spirits with the benefit of whatever level of workout they chose. And they have the satisfaction of moving from one place to another, the way evolution designed us to move using our own muscles. E-bikes are better for the environment than electric cars. A study predicted that as electric cars become cheaper and more widespread, they'll create more urban congestion, urban sprawl, and adverse health impacts in the form of obesity because they're cheaper to fuel and maintain than gasoline vehicles, and they'll provide more incentives for people to drive. In contrast, e-bikes are more efficient to operate, to make, than electric cars. They reduce congestion, they don't create sprawl, and they enhance health via physical activity. Widespread use of e-bikes will allow us to reclaim our cities for people and nature instead of organizing our cities around automobiles. That's it for me, and I'm happy to pass it to Carl.
Hey everybody, I'm Carl from San Diego Sierra Club, and in Utrecht and throughout the Netherlands, cycling routes are often completely separated as cycle tracks or designated cycle paths. And when cycle routes are shared with local traffic, car traffic, the red colored streets designate this space is primarily for bikes, and cars are guests and must wait for safe opportunity to pass. They also built contiguous bike routes with under and overpasses to ensure cycling traffic can flow as freely as possible. After all, starting and stopping your bike at a light every block makes bike travel harder and slower. So they created what's known as the green wave, timing traffic lights to match bike speeds, thus giving cyclists a constant green light. Here in San Diego, we can induce cycling by adopting people-centric designs like this. Also in Utrecht, they provided massive free bike parking infrastructure at their train station to allow people who must go beyond the range of their bike to easily use biking as their first mile strategy. Mode shift, in many cases, requires a cultural shift, and you can't help but be encouraged to consider biking when smacked in the face with the spectacle of 12,000 bike parking spaces at your train station. Electronic bike lockers, like those already being rolled out here in San Diego, are a great way to protect e-bikes when there's not enough demand for a secure parking lot. When you place these at destinations, like at the beach, for example, you can induce people to leave their car at home and bike there instead. This is a photo of Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority's bike coach. It allows riders to sit next to their bike, thereby satisfying their concerns about security of their bike. In San Francisco, with their Bikes on Board program, 80% of cyclists who used the train only did so after they were allowed to take their bikes with them. That program demonstrates the importance of planning for the inclusion of bikes on transit, and many commuters' preference or need to use bikes both for the first and the last miles of their commute. At its peak, Caltrans logged an average of 6,207 bike riders bringing their bikes on the train each weekday. Okay, I'm going back to Utrecht again because they've got wonderful examples there. In Utrecht and throughout the Netherlands, they train children at school how to ride a bike safely in traffic. This encourages adoption of bikes to families who weren't previously biking. One day a year, 200,000 children who have reached the age of 12 take a local bike traffic test. Because of this program, children are expected to bike to school. And you can imagine that sets them up for a lifetime of bike commuting. Bikes aren't an afterthought, they're the rule. So to induce cycling, our cities and the county can support programming like this. Our regional governments should promote cycling as fun, healthy, eco-friendly way to improve your life. In the solar industry, there's an accepted phenomena that one home in a neighborhood getting rooftop solar induces other homeowners to understand the benefits and also adopt solar. The same is true with utility cycling. So to induce cycling, our cities must increase investment in programs to promote cycling with bike events, adult training, bike festivals, and e-bike loaner programs for first-time bike commuters to try before they buy. They must increase messaging about how cycling mitigates climate crisis and physically get ambassador cyclists out there as a demonstration to everybody that our streets and our climate are well suited for cycling. Let us be careful to explain the benefits, the need to reduce our energy consumption, and get on with inducing cycling. Let's redefine the term supercommuter to be one who travels 12 daily miles on a bicycle or 30 with an e-bike. Now I'm going to pass it to Nicole.
I need to unmute. I apologize. My name is Nicole Burgess. I'll start again. I'm from Bike SC, and I'm going to wrap it up with safety and inspiration. I'm sure there are some of you that are interested in riding but concerned about safety. It is shown that over 60% of the US population is interested but concerned, so you are not alone. Over about 10 years ago, I started a Dana Bike Train, a successful program that encouraged 10 to 12-year-olds to ride safely to school. It was a form of induced cycling on a neighborhood scale. This was a typical day on Chatsworth and Nimitz in Point Loma, a busy car-centric intersection until the bike train rolls through. As a group, we were well seen, and people driving cars actually became more aware and more cautious when we were on the road. Being experienced with riding alone and in groups, I'm a firm believer that the more people that ride bikes, the safer we will all be. And this was evident during the pandemic. As more people began to ride, it inspired more people to ride. There was a feeling that it was safe to do so. And yes, less cars on the road helped to make our streets safer. If one trip can be made by riding a bike, that means one less vehicle on the road. So we must all work together to be safe, and we can all do our part to induce cycling. And strategies for Vision Zero, an ambitious goal to reduce traffic fatalities to zero, including people walking, people riding bikes, and people driving vehicles and other modes, can help dictate good street design that prioritizes separated safe access for people biking. And I support these efforts and want us all to be safe, however we decide to move. The table that Katie provided here is a collection of data that shows travel preferences from approximately 7,000 adults at UCSD. They were asked about comfort level on different facilities. As you can see, a major street with no bike lane, the top line. The second is a major street with a bike lane. And the last one is a completely separated path or trail. The green shows that it is very comfortable, whereas the red is very uncomfortable. You can see a very clear relationship of increasing comfort with separation from traffic. Here is a Class 1 facility along the San Diego River. This is a Class 1 beautiful bikeway in San Diego along the San Diego River. It is wonderful to have these spaces to feel comfortable
and enjoy our commutes. These types of paths highlight the joys and the beauty of riding in San Diego.
There is definitely an opportunity to create safe and comfortable Class 1 bikeways along our waterways. Chollas Creek is a perfect example of a regional linear park that has a multitude of intersecting benefits from connectivity, mobility, water and air quality, health, environmental justice, access to outdoor space, and quality of life. This vision connects residents from La Mesa and Lemon Grove to the Harbor and Bayshore Bikeway, a pleasant 4 to 7 mile bike ride, depending where you live. Our entire network of watersheds throughout the region can become part of this wonderful bike utopia. Investing in our water and how it moves and how we can move with it along a very gradual grade, avoiding the large hills and traversing through the canyons is a vision for the region. Pacific Highway is another one that can be a transformative project for the region to connect the San Diego Bay and Mission Bay while providing a linear park to connect the heart of San Diego. Pacific Highway is the backbone of our city and a critical connection for people riding a bike. As this area will be affected by sea level rise, as seen in the photo to the left, it has the opportunity to be transformed into an amazing asset as seen in South Korea and other places around the world. And our transit, we want to support transit, we advocate for transit, and we want to ensure that the new Midcoast trolley is a success. The current conditions to the Balboa Transit Station are unacceptable, dangerous, and difficult to navigate. These visuals help you understand what is possible that's seen around in other countries to help create safe access across the I-5 or perhaps under. It will be extremely important to integrate bikes into transit for a wonderful mobility system in San Diego. We've heard a little bit about e-bikes, and this was a Pedal Ahead was launched last week. With the innovation of e-bikes, riding a bike in San Diego becomes a viable option. As we heard from Steve and others, it takes all the weight away. The hills become flat and one can travel long distances and never sweat. It is our responsibility to provide safe infrastructure so that these riders and new riders are truly safe and will always want to ride. If you live in County District 4, Nathan Fletcher's district, then you have an opportunity to apply to receive an electric bike. Go to the website Pedal Ahead for more info. This program is public and private partnership that should be replicated throughout the county and state. I call this my next generation SUV. It is an electric tandem, the family bike for all ages. I can drop off my kids, pick them up, or I can take my mom on an adventure with this beautiful bike. My hopes are to inspire some of you to embrace ecotourism, a local carbon neutral way to explore our beautiful planet and our beautiful city that we live in. Warm Showers is an organization, a community of cyclists, supporting others to enjoy the outdoor space and to have a safe place to camp overnight. People like my mom, myself, and perhaps some of you on this call have beautiful campsites in your backyards to share with all of us and provide opportunities for others to travel by bike. And just a little bit of cost benefits. According to AAA, the average car expenses for an individual are estimated $9,000 per year, which doesn't add in the cost of society or our environment. This is not a typical vehicle that one would park in a driveway, but it is what I had for a photo to show what a concrete driveway can be converted into. By eliminating a vehicle and possibly becoming car-free, one can create space that was once dedicated to a car to perhaps a place to grow yummy food right at your doorstep. And with those cost savings of almost $10,000 a year, roughly 20 to 60% of some people's income, one can actually buy 4 electric bikes. Imagine where you can go with that. I will say, du'ir mir sikar pa siklen and isolfan. I don't think I have that my accent right, but this is a campaign from Denmark, and it basically says you are healthier riding a bike than sitting on a couch. And we heard all the wonderful benefits from Katie, and your health is so important for being strong, resilient, and happy, and able to take care of our planet together. Climate crisis is real. There is no time to wait. We must act quickly, efficiently, and responsibly. We must embrace biking to improve our quality of life and to protect our climate. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicole. I don't see a ton of questions, but we'll go over what we did get. And I also wanted to point out that on this last slide, we have our contact information. So if you'd like to jot that down, and I'll also send a follow-up to folks so that they can have a recording of this webinar so that you can share it with friends and family and help get the message out. So one question that we had was sort of a comment, but it was talking about how flat it is in the Netherlands. And that's true. The Netherlands is not as challenged with the hills that we have here in San Diego and the canyons. And I think if you ask somebody from outside of San Diego, maybe on the East Coast, how hilly is San Diego, they guess it's probably flat since it's a beach community. But the truth is, it can be very challenging to cycle here in San Diego. I had a 20-mile each way commute, and I did have a couple of really gnarly hills on that commute. And without the benefit of an e-bike, I wouldn't have been able to try that commute. But having used the e-bike, it became much more realistic. And it was the only time in the past 20 years I've gotten 2 hours of exercise a day. So that was fantastic. Someone asked, they missed the beginning of the meeting. This is being recorded, and we will send out the recording. We'll also try to post it up on social media. Let's see here. There's a question here. Maybe, I think we lost Katie, but maybe Nicole knows the answer to this. Are there a League of American Bicyclists trained instructors in the area?
Yes, we still are training league cyclists, and thank you for being one. I am actually a league certified instructor for biking. The San Diego Bicycle Coalition does support that program and trains new people, I believe, yearly, maybe twice a year. And it is great to be able to provide that basic knowledge to other riders, and safety is a big concern. So it is nice to have those. And we also have, just a note, for those of you who are new to cycling, the coalition does have a lot of educational classes that just teaches you the proper way to safely bike in traffic, as we do have to be on some of those lanes. I saw a comment, a lot of times we don't have those class 1 facilities, and we do need to be on streets with a lot of bike lanes and traffic. So it teaches you just how to navigate that better.
And those bike classes are actually something they're asking our bus drivers to take too, so that they're aware of how to interact with the bicycles. And so that's an important point to note, that once you become a cyclist, or maybe become a cyclist again, because many of us learned how to ride when we were kids, and a lot of people took a break in between and then get back into cycling. But once you become a cyclist, you're much more aware of how the cars are interacting. And then when you get back in your car, you're much more aware of what the bikes are up against, and it makes you a better car driver around bikes. So someone here Natasha mentioned that one of the biggest problems is getting people interested in biking. And she said it needs to be a bigger push in the city. And that's certainly why one of the reasons why we're talking about it today. This doesn't happen by accident. The cities that have really become really bike-centric cities have done it through a lot of dedication and hard work. It generally doesn't happen by itself. We tend to be lazy, and we fall back on that car technology when we can. So someone asked here, how close is San Diego to reaching the 6% ridership by the end of 2020? Noah, do you have any guesses on that?
Yeah. So that's a great question. So every year, the city of San Diego does an annual monitoring report on the progress towards their climate action plan targets. There are a couple issues here. One, the city does not actually do a great job at collecting data on whether or not more people are biking. So the main issue is we need to actually be pushing our cities to be counting. We know that Sandag has a lot of technology out there, and they're counting. ridership throughout the region. But we need our cities to be tracking progress towards these targets, or else the goals don't really make a lot of sense if we don't even know if we're getting any closer. But based on some modeling that the city has done most recently in 2018, I believe, they show that they pretty much have made zero progress towards this 6% by 2020 target. It's still below 2-ish. So I think I had some mode share targets up on one of my slides, but I think, yeah, there hasn't been much progress that's been made. And the key is that we need to be building the infrastructure to support increased mode shift, because like we've heard today from so many people, I mean, we're not going to get more people taking other modes like biking if they don't feel safe doing it. Yeah, we want to see tracking progress towards those goals, and also infrastructure that will actually support those goals, which we're a little behind on.
Thanks, Noah. And I'll point out that we have 18 cities here in the county, including the city of San Diego, and all of them that have climate action plans have in some way or another accounted for active transportation and an increase in active transportation to help mitigate climate crisis. But we can see that they're all failing at this because they're not working hard enough to really come up with ways, inventive ways to get people walking more and certainly cycling. So it's on us now to push our governments. Here's a question. What are the highest priority actions that need to be taken in San Diego, and how can we help?
I'll jump in there, Carl, and just say, you know, one of the greatest things is leadership in our city. So you can get out there and vote for the right people. And Bike SD has as well as Sierra Club, have endorsements for people, for leaders who actually can make the changes that we need to see in San Diego. So that would be one way that I would say is a priority, is getting the leadership, as well as our own leadership, right? So encouraging you and your neighbors to get out there and enjoy the ride.
Yeah, that's really important, Nicole. And not only having the right leaders, but also constantly getting to talk to them, right? And letting them know that this is a priority, because we can't just wait until the next election and hope that our representatives remember why we cared about having them elected. They constantly need to be reminded about climate crisis and about how we are demanding them to do the best thing that they can for us, you know, as far as expanding these programs. So thanks, that's a great answer.
Yes, thank you.
Here's a question that's a little tricky, and I've done some reading. Go ahead.
Sorry, Carl, I just wanted to jump in and say, I think we really need to work on creating a culture shift as well. And that means getting out a lot more information and examples, like the examples of Nicole and her family, so that people see what is possible with bikes, because the mentality, the default mentality in our communities is you need a car to go anywhere. So I think the more we show alternatives, the more we show people successfully and happily using bikes, we need to get articles in newspapers and magazines and on news shows and all these ways so that people see how practical this is and how important it is.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. It is really important. You have to model the behavior to people and make them aware that it's an alternative, because if they don't see it, and they won't think to do it themselves. So here's a question that Jessica asked. She said she's seen inconsistent data on whether biking is actually carbon negative. Depending on what food you eat, and to make up for increased eating associated with the expensing energy biking, do you have any good studies that show actual data on carbon footprint and changes with biking? So I can try to tackle that one. Jessica, it's an important point, sort of from a nerd perspective, of like, if we're actually doing checking our carbon footprint, you know, maybe on the most efficient train that you could set up, could you compare that to having to eat a whole extra meal? I can tell you from my cycling days, commuting 20 miles each way, I pretty much made up for that with an extra banana, right? So it doesn't take a tremendous amount of extra meal to make up for that cycling difference. And actually the added benefits in health are like way outweigh any expense that you might have. But carbon wise, I can pretty much assure you that as long as you're dealing with bikes and really small micro mobility, you're going to be way out ahead with these smaller ways of moving around. To give you an idea too, my bicycle, I compared it at the time, this was 4 years ago, to a Tesla Model S, and I was 20 times more efficient than a Tesla Model S at getting to work. So that's in the electricity with my e-bike. So yeah, I did have to eat that banana, but I'm pretty sure that wasn't what was going to kill us. Now I could eat even more local food, right? That would be even better. Okay, next question is for Mary. Do kids need electric bike licenses?
So I see Mary has 2 questions, and also is special helmets required. So I'm assuming that's for electric bikes. I do not know of, am not aware of any kids needing electric bike licenses. I believe in order to rent one or to use one as a bike share system, you need to be 16 or 18 years old, as well as wearing helmets. You have to wear a helmet up to 18 years old. No special helmets are required for electric bikes. If you are an owner of an electric bike and your kid is confident riding and is knowledgeable riding an electric bike, I don't see a problem with it. There are no rules or laws that I am aware of. And it helps them actually keep up and maintain the speed that maybe their adult partners are riding at.
So I wanted to jump in and say there are varieties of electric bikes, and the ones that appeal to me most are the ones that are completely pedal assist and have a maximum speed of 20 miles per hour with the pedal assist. And I think those tend to be legal to be ridden almost everywhere that anybody can ride a bike. There are some other models that go faster, up to 28 miles or even more. And I don't think those would be safe for children to ride. And there are restrictions about some of those kinds of bikes in terms of where they can be ridden.
Good follow-up, Steve.
So I think the rest of what okay, here's more. What do the leaders on this call think about the bike share programs? I'll let Nicole answer that one.
You know, I support bike share. I think it's wonderful. I think it should be integrated into our transit system. Imagine if you had a transit pass that actually got you on a bike share after you needed to make that last mile trip. Bike share in San Diego has had its ups and downs, as we've seen, and I think it's just an evolving type of mode of transportation that we can continue to improve. And you know, I don't think it's going anywhere, and I want to support it as that last mile, first mile trip to our transit. So I think it's important.
Yeah, and I would just add that what we saw happen in the very early days of bike share, both in China and then here, is that when we leave it completely unregulated and there's no coordination between the municipality and the businesses that offer bike shares or scooter shares, things can get a little out of control. You know, the bikes or the scooters can stack up on street corners and block streets and sidewalks. And so that's a problem. So we certainly want there to be coordination between the municipalities and if a bike share is a private organization. But there are certainly lots of places that have done that and it's worked out well. Mary's asking if the new paths and lanes, have they been proven to be safe? In other words, do we really see a safety benefit when we cordon off a section of road that is strictly for bike traffic only?
I know that there are, go ahead, Noah. Go ahead, thank you.
No, I was going to say I don't have any studies or statistics that are coming to mind right now, but I know anecdotally that it's definitely true. I think what's really important, or equally as important, is that people who are a little, like Nicole was saying when she had a slide up about this, people who are a little tentative to bike will feel much more encouraged to bike if they have a physically protected bike lane as opposed to a painted lane, whether that's flex posts or bollards or just any or grade separated lane, anything that's physically protecting the cyclist from car traffic. We know, I've seen plenty of studies about this, we know that folks will be more encouraged to try biking as a form of commuting if they're not already doing that. So I think that's equally as important to the safety piece in its own right, which, yeah, I'd have to do some research on that, but I feel certain that it is safer than just the painted lane. But go ahead, Nicole.
No, you had it right on, Noah. That's exactly what I have. So I haven't seen any statistics here, but we have seen plenty of studies that show bike lanes do have that safety component, that comfort component as seen in that graph. And then Carl, if I can chime in to Craig Reed, he has some good questions and what systems are in place so planners have to consider active transportation as part of the initial plans rather than added on as an afterthought. So creating those comfortable paths are critical. And how can we do that when we're actually doing the actual work on the streets? And in the city of San Diego, we've had an ambitious plan to resurface our streets, and how we can allocate space for bike commuters on those streets is critically important. And we currently use SB1 funds that actually have a provision in there to create safe facilities for bikers and people walking when it's feasible. So the leadership at the city and the transportation engineers and the transportation department need to really use their due diligence to really create those safe facilities when they're actually doing road work, in my opinion. So I appreciate your questions on action items and what we can do and how you can support. So thank you for those questions.
So James asked, what about non-painted bike lanes versus painted bike lanes? Is there a preference? So I would say from my own personal experience, just having a bike lane with a bike on it is one big benefit. I know personally the rides that I ride around here in Fallbrook, some of them are designated with a bike lane, and I can travel the full length of them, several miles, and not see a little bicycle on them. And what that means is that drivers don't understand that that's something that the county considers to be a bike lane. So yeah, let's start with pinning the bicycles on them and making drivers aware that that is a space that is supposed to be allocated for bicycles. Certainly we see in some cities where we use the green paint on a dedicated bike lane, that really wakes drivers up to the fact that, okay, I should expect to see a bicycle in that lane. And that's also one of the ways that we induce cycling, is to show that dedicated space that was designed for use with a bike, that invites people to say, oh wow, on my commute I passed 75% of my route had either that picture of that bicycle on that side or it had a green lane, which really told me, okay, I can cover my entire route with a bicycle. Now I just have to figure out if I'm either fit enough or if I can maybe get an electric bike that makes sure that I can get there.
And I would just add to that too, Carl. I think that's great. I also think it really depends on the type of street that you're on for all of these. But if you're on a really wide 4-lane road with 30+ miles per hour cars, both a painted and a non-painted lane is going to feel unsafe, but a painted lane will likely feel more safe. If you're on kind of just a neighborhood road that's narrow, pretty much no car traffic going through, and there isn't a painted lane, but it's a bike route with sharrows, maybe you feel super safe on that road because even though there's no bike lane, there's also no car traffic, and maybe you live in a neighborhood with kids running around. Yeah, I mean, of course, we always need to be considering like the threat of traffic violence in any street scenario, but that's just to say, I think the design of the streets also really matters just as much, not just the type of facility.
I'll just say too that,
Yeah, I wanted,
go ahead, Steve.
yeah, I just wanted to give a shout out to Malcolm, who noted that he's been commuting for 23 years on Pacific Highway, which is one of the most difficult places to commute on. We've all had that experience because that's a place where sometimes you can't tell if there's a bike lane, and the quality of the road is so bad. You're bouncing around and you want to get into traffic to avoid the holes in the road. So
exactly. Thank you. Thank you. It's a terrible street. Even worse because a bike lane starts and stops and ends. There's no consistency, and cyclists coming in from North County to downtown have no really good route to get downtown.
Right.
Yeah, I'd like to point out too that one of the things that those of us that have cycled for a while and that have traveled sometimes at cycling events or maybe been in competitions is once you have several bikes in a cluster, or as traffic is continuing, they see bike after bike after bike. This makes drivers much more aware that there's going to be a cyclist around the next corner, and that they need to check their mirror before they make their right-hand turn across the bike lane. So we can look forward to, as we increase our cycling here in the county and in all of our cities in San Diego, as we approach critical mass, cycling becomes more safe inherently, because with greater numbers comes much greater acceptance of the fact that folks do need to share the road, and they become much more aware of what to expect. They become better drivers around cyclists. So these are all good things to look forward to. I think we're close to our 7:30 stop time. So I want to thank everybody for coming to have this talk with us tonight. And we want to encourage you to reach out to those organizations that helped present tonight, work with us, and we can all advocate within our cities to help do this work and get our elected officials to help support the infrastructure changes, the program changes. Some of these, like our tactical urbanism, are about getting quick change done fast, because climate crisis is not going to wait 20 or 30 years for us to slowly make changes to infrastructure. We need to do things quickly. So thank you again for everybody who participated. Thanks for all the folks that helped present tonight. And we look forward to seeing you again. We're gonna, Sierra Club's gonna do this once a month. We're gonna be talking about different transportation issues. So watch your mail for that, and I'll be in touch, and we will send around a recording later. And thank you everybody once again for being with us. And if y'all would like to unmute yourselves and say goodbye, it was great sharing space with you all.